Hello, everyone. I'm Armando Manuel, the World Bank Group Executive Director, representing Angola, Nigeria, and South Africa. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's virtual event to release the World Bank Inspection Panel latest advisory report titled Right to be Heard, Intimidation and Reprisals in the World Bank Inspection Panel Complaints. These advisory report, the 7 in the panel's emerging lesson series, delves into the panel's experience and the practices responding to reprisals since its inception nearly 30 years ago. The report cites various allegations of reprisals presented to the panel through request for inspection or during and sometimes after the processing of those requests. The report aims to be of use to development practitioners at the World Bank and elsewhere, and to anyone else with an interest in or need for accountability. A fundamental premise for accountability mechanisms is that affected people can access them safely. So the topic of reprisals aimed at complainants, potentially complainants, and those otherwise involved complaints is an important one. And we have a group of expert speakers today to discuss this matter. We will be starting with Mary Lawlor, a UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders. Mary has worked extensively with and on the situation of human rights defenders. In 2001, she founded Frontline Defenders, the International Foundation for the protection of the human rights defenders to concentrate on human rights defenders at risk. As executive director from 2001 to 2016, Mary represented the Frontline Defenders and had a key role in its development. Prior to that, Mary had been a director of the IRIS section of Amnesty International. And we are extremely pleased that she has agreed to provide the opening remarks to today's event. Mary, over to you, please.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak here today. I'm really delighted to be here. And I apologize in advance that I can only stay 1 hour. I really would have liked to stay longer. But I need to preface my remarks by saying I'm not overly familiar with the intricacies of how the inspection panel or the World Bank operates. So I'm offering reflections on this report purely based on what might be most helpful for human rights defenders. With that in mind, I warmly welcome the launch of the report today and believe the report represents an important development on the issue of retaliation against human rights defenders, both within the IFI context, but also more broadly. This report contains a wealth of valuable information and lessons learned, and will be particularly helpful to businesses as they grapple with how to carry out human rights and environmental due diligence, as many will be obliged to in the coming decade. In recent months, I have been lobbying for the inclusion of human rights defenders as key stakeholders in the forthcoming EU legislation on mandatory human rights due diligence. I firmly believe that activities which carry potential adverse impacts on human rights must be preceded by a consultation process with local human rights defenders and a risk assessment on what operations might have on human rights defenders and their communities. and their local communities. And I believe that it is up to human rights defenders and local communities to say whether they think there will be adverse impacts, rather than the business or the enterprise. That is one reason why I'm so glad to see human rights defenders front and center in the framing of this report. Although the contexts are somewhat different, the emphasis in the report on preempting reprisals by engaging stakeholders, including defenders, at the earliest stage is very welcome. This is something that I hope the bank is doing on a routine basis, and perhaps, Mr. Manuel, you could explain that process to me later. Part of what I will be doing with business early next year is highlighting why early consultations with human rights defenders and others can reduce the risk of human rights violations further down the line. And in making this argument, I will draw on the experience of the inspection panel outlined in this report, which says, once reprisals commence, protecting requesters can be complicated and difficult. Therefore, creating an environment where communities can safely raise and resolve their concerns is a key preventative measure. Continuous stakeholder engagement throughout the project cycle is also key to prevention. The willingness of the panel to reflect honestly on shortcomings in the process is very much appreciated, and sometimes something we don't often see, and we certainly don't see enough of it. It is very valuable for those of us working to protect human rights defenders to have concrete examples to point to when trying to encourage other actors to improve their own processes. The admission of a weak consultation process in the DRC Pro Roots case, which resulted in a risk assessment that overlooked some community concerns and therefore potential adverse impacts and mitigation measures, is very useful in this regard, as is the point highlighting the importance of continued consultation throughout the project cycle, which, if it had happened in this case, could have helped identify warning signs and prevented some of the harm that occurred. These are two of the elements I have been focusing on in my engagement with the European Commission in advance of the legislative initiative. From my reading of the report, the process that the inspection panel has now in place to anticipate and mitigate reprisals seemed robust, well thought out, and considers many of the main challenges that human rights defenders may face in highlighting violations they believe are linked to a bank-funded project. Where I think there may be some room for further strengthening the process is on what action may be taken once defenders have been threatened. For the inspection panel, this may be increased collaboration with organizations with expertise on protection of human rights defenders and journalists, so that they are able to play that linking role. I understand that this is currently happening on an ad hoc basis, but something more systematic may benefit both the complainants and the inspection panel. Secondly, I see a greater role for bank management to play when reprisals occur. I appreciate the examples highlighted in the report of where the bank management did act, but some of the examples raised some questions for me. For instance, in the case of Chad in 2001, where the bank president phoned the president of Chad directly to successfully urge for the release of a complainant who was detained and tortured. One of the lessons learned is, and I quote, while such high-level involvement can be effective, the decision to use it requires careful deliberation, as it can only be used sparingly and in severe circumstances. I would have thought that in any case where a person is detained and their detention is linked to their voicing of concerns about a bank project, such a response from bank management is warranted. In many of the countries where this is likely to happen, torture and mistreatment is widespread, which makes an urgent response from the bank more important. Additionally, by showing that the bank is willing to act vocally and quickly in such cases, it may give more confidence to stakeholders to contribute fully to consultation processes as projects are being planned. In the 2013 example from Uzbekistan, it is noted that risk mitigation measures and engagement with the government of Uzbekistan by the panel resulted in temporary protection of complainants. However, the panel was made aware of continued reprisals after they had left. In these types of situations, I would see an onus on the bank management to ensure that those involved in the reprisals do not have further access to bank funding if the project has already been completed, or if still ongoing, that funds are withheld and provisions for such are written into contracts at the very beginning. If the focus is solely on the safety of the individual at risk, crucial as that is, but without consideration of sanction being applied to the borrower, which has contravened the bank's zero tolerance policy, then there is no reason to believe that the behavior of the borrower will change. Perhaps this is already happening, and if so, it would be useful to learn in what situations such steps have been taken. As you may be aware, the UN has also been struggling to deal effectively with reprisals against people who interact with its human rights mechanisms. The most visible response is probably the annual reprisals report by the Assistant Secretary General in which states that engage in reprisals are named and shamed, which, by the way, I hope bank staff consult with when doing initial risk assessments, as it's a very good indicator of the countries where reprisals might take place. If I've learned anything in my time since becoming Special Rapporteur, it is how states detect publicity like this, and why I believe it is an effective tool in encouraging better behavior in relation to human rights defenders. I raise this because I think there would be real value in providing a breakdown of the countries from where the inspection panel received credible allegations of reprisals and publicizing it in the World Bank annual report. I believe that there would also be value in including more information on the work of the panel, complaints received, and steps taken to address them in the annual report. I will finish by reiterating my appreciation for this report and the clear progress the inspection panel and the bank is making in responding to potential actual reprisals. In relation to human rights defenders, the bank is ahead of most businesses I have been in touch with. That said, of course, there's always a distance to travel. And given how civil society is being suffocated in every region of the world, it is nearly inevitable that the cases of reprisals linked to bank projects will only increase in the coming years, highlighting why a robust system to assess, respond, and mitigate risk is more important than ever. My office and I would be very willing to continue our engagement with the bank and the inspection panel on this vital issue. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much for your remarks, Mary. On behalf of the World Bank Inspection Panel, I want to thank you for taking the time during such a busy period to speak and share your thoughts with us. Indeed, we look forward for future engagements, and thank you again. With me today as well are several speakers to provide their perspectives on the topic. They are Ramani Kunaniagan, a member of the inspection panel who led the publication of this report. Ramani joined the panel in December 2018 and will become the panel chair in January. Over the years, Ramani has held leadership positions in sustainability in both the private and the non-profit sectors. Just prior to join the panel, she was the global head for social performance and the human rights for BG Group Shell. She has served as a member of the board of 2 international nonprofit development organizations, Resolve and the Institute of Human Rights and Businesses. We have also Delphine Jirabai, a prominent human rights attorney in Chad, and a co-founder of Chadian Association for Promotion and Defense of Human Rights. She also opened the Public Interest Law Center in Chad, the first of its kind in Central Africa. Delphine was selected for the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award in 2004. The award is presented to honor courageous and innovative individuals striving for social justice. I should also add that she was a requester in a panel case for 2001, one of the cases cited in the report. We have Maninder Jewel, a director, Environmental and Social Standards at the World Bank. Maninder joined the World Bank in 1995 and has held several senior positions in addition to this current one. They included the Global Director for World Bank Environment and Social Framework, a Director of Social Development, where he led a team of about 300 social scientists committed to promote social inclusive development. He also worked as a director responsible for the design and implementation of the bank's internal institutional reforms. We have also Salil Tripathi. Is a senior advisor for global issues at the Institute for Human Rights and the Business. Salil worked on human rights for quite a long time, has been focused on themes such as discrimination, protection of human rights, defenders, and emerging issues for businesses and human rights. He is also an award-winning journalist and chairs a PEN International Writers in Prison Committee. Salil worked at Amnesty International from 1999 to 2005, where he developed policies and thinking on complicity, privatization, and corruption. Salil has written extensively on the topic of human rights. Once again, welcome, and thank you all for participating. We will begin with the short opening statements for our speakers and leave the reminder of our time, questions and answers. If you'd like to ask a question, please indicate by writing on the YouTube chat page. Please include your name and affiliation with your questions. We will get to you as many questions we can. We are recording today's section. A video of the section will be available on the panel's website and its YouTube channel in the next couple of days. So moving, Remini, would you like to begin, please?
Thank you so much, Armando, and thank you, Mary, so much. Thanks to all my fellow speakers and to all of you who are joining this discussion via YouTube. At the outset, I want to note the recent passing of Professor John Ruggie. His death is a huge loss to the human rights community, but what a critically important legacy he leaves behind for all of us. I knew Professor Ruggie personally and so experienced firsthand the impact his work had. He will truly be missed. Today, we released the 7th report in our Emerging Lessons series on the topic of reprisals aimed at those involved in complaints to the inspection panel. As Armando mentioned earlier, we begin with the premise that access to the inspection panel must be free of coercion and reprisal. We believe that any form of reprisal against requesters, potential requesters, or anyone involved in the panel process threatens the integrity of the World Bank's accountability process. Our report has 2 main objectives. First, to share the panel's experience, knowledge, practice, and the practical steps taken to date in response to reports of reprisals. Second, to examine how project-affected people can be preemptively protected from the risk of reprisals and remain engaged in the development. We heard about this from Mary just now as well. This is important as those who bring complaints to the panel raise issues that are often critical for their own livelihoods and welfare and the cohesion of their families and societies. This report is also very frank in discussing the limitations of the panel and bank management in affording protection for once reprisals have started to occur, despite best efforts on all parties. The case studies and examples presented in the report illustrate the different types of reprisals reported by requesters, project-affected people, and others associated with the panel process, the mitigating actions the panel and the bank management took to address those reprisals, and the outcome of those efforts, both positive and negative. The type of reprisals experienced or alleged by those involved in panel cases range from intimidating comments, surveillance, anonymous phone calls, solitary confinement, acts of torture in 2 cases, death threats, forceful eviction, and allegations of an online smear campaign, to verbal attacks from fellow community members labeling those protesting, objecting, raising concerns as anti-development and anti-progress. The report also, the panel also analyzes in this report qualitative and quantitative data from its cases to present trends observed throughout its nearly 3 decades of experience and existence. For example, the data indicates the following. 1, an upward trend for requests for confidentiality and requests and reports of retaliation and reprisal. 57% of panel cases have either allegations of reprisals or requests for confidentiality. 40% of those cases report allegations of reprisal. 2, a higher prevalence in cases involving land projects. 86% of cases involving allegations of reprisals are related to land concerns. Third, a strong correlation between incidences and/or allegations of reprisal and lack of meaningful consultation. Again, something highlighted by Mary just now. We see this in 48% of cases where allegations of reprisals have been made. And fourth, the requests for inspection received from the community tend to involve more threats of retaliation and more frequent requests for confidentiality than requests for inspection filed by local civil society organizations. The trends observed by the panel in its data analysis are similar to analysis in recent international publications on human rights defenders, that point to a continuing upward trend of reported and alleged attacks on human rights defenders and acts of intimidation and reprisals against opponents of actual or potential project impact. I'm sure our panelists from civil society will expand more on this particular issue. The increase in reported reprisals has led the panel to take a series of incremental steps towards a more systematic approach to addressing allegations of retaliation. The issuance of the panel's 2060 retaliation guidelines, the goal of which is to reduce the risk of retaliation against requesters, their representatives, and persons associated with the panel, and foster a safe environment for those seeking to work with the panel, illustrate this more systematic approach. Besides its zero tolerance approach to reprisals, the panel was the first amongst the international financial institutes and the international accountability mechanisms to issue guidelines that included specific preventive and precautionary measures. The panel was also the first international accountability mechanism to report on reprisals in case-related documents. This practice commenced very early in the panel's operations and continues to this day. Our report notes that once a complaint is filed to the panel, it can raise the profile of persons or the person who submitted it, potentially exposing them to unwanted attention and a host of questions and suspicions about their motives and agenda. The report also highlights the panel's reliance on and the importance of seeking the World Bank management's assistance to address incidents and allegations of reprisals in its cases. The insights in this advisory note that once reprisals commence, protecting requesters can be complicated and difficult. Therefore, creating an environment where communities can safely raise and resolve their concerns is a key to preventive measures. And as I alluded earlier, continuous stakeholder engagement throughout the project cycle and an effective and functioning grievance mechanism are also key to prevention. In closing, let me stress that this advisory report is not intended to provide an exhaustive range of solutions. Rather, it brings together a body of work with the objective of creating incremental progress towards establishing a comprehensive system that responds to the increasing trend of reports of reprisals in development projects and to encourage further improvements. The panel views this report as a building block on which others may continue to build as the thinking and practice in this area evolves. We hope you find this report useful. I look forward to hearing the views of my fellow panelists and to responding to any questions that many of you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Remini. Delphine, would you like to go next, please?
Yes, thank you for giving me the floor. I thank the organizers for inviting me to sit in such an important panel about the report on reprisal in the extinction panel proceedings. As a human rights defender, we have been at the front line to help local populations to know their rights and to claim them in the context of the Chad-Cameroon pipeline. The Chad-Cameroon pipeline project has been presented by the World Bank as a development model for the century, while the consequences are disastrous for the people of Chad. The support of the World Bank was key for the other donors and the oil consortium led by ExxonMobil. The goal of this project was to reduce poverty in Chad. This goal was never achieved because conditions were not in place in Chad for such a project. The context of Chad at the time was made up of bad governance, armed conflicts for power, lack of democracy, lack of transparency in the management of public affairs, rampant corruption, no freedom of press, of opinion, nor of association. In social context, no consultation, no proper consultation was undertaken. As a response to massive human rights violations and criticism surrounding the said project, the World Bank itself, in addition to multiple internal safeguards, commissioned a review of the extractive industries. The most important recommendation, in our opinion, in that review is that the World Bank should not invest in extractive industries projects to countries in conflict where human rights are not respected. This recommendation was never taken into consideration by the World Bank. The project implemented in such a context still gave rise to numerous human rights violations. For example, and Mary has she has spoken about it, Mr. Yoronga Gagledi, Deputy of the Republic and co-initiator of the complaint to the inspection panel, had been arrested and tortured on the pretext that he opposed the exploitation of the oil, and his life was saved thanks to our action relayed by Mrs. Corina Horta to the former president of the World Bank, Mr. James Wolfenson. Several other victims of the project financed by the World Bank are still seeking redress. Populations of the oil zone have become poorer than they were before the exploitation of oil. And as you all know, Chad is still among the 3 poorest countries in the world, and N'Djamena, the capital city, is amongst the 3 most expensive cities in the world. By approaching the inspection panel with a complaint, we hoped that the project would be reframed, that human rights violations could be adequately addressed, that the institutional and operational capacity of the Chadian government will be strengthened before continuing with the project. But the very relevant recommendations of the inspection panel were not implemented by the management. Our voices, the voices of the civil society on behalf of the people have not been heard. Currently, oil money has exacerbated political armed conflict and worsened the governance issues in Chad without reducing poverty. Several challenges have to be taken into consideration as to guarantee local populations effective access to remedies. And among those challenges is the fact that the World Bank should be accountable of what has been done when a project financed by it have done damages to people. And The second is how to give the inspection panel a real independence and how to ensure that its findings and recommendations are enforceable. Because in the case of the Chad Cameroon pipeline, the inspection panel have conduct its fact-finding missions, have come out with very relevant recommendations, but it's just like nothing has been done and the project have continued. And now Chad is bearing the very, very bad consequences, as you may know, the political situation is at risk. The social situation, as I said, is one of the bad we have never experienced before. So the reprisals, when they occur, how could either the inspection panel really address them at the real time as to prevent people's life? I will stop there and I thank you all.
Thank you very much, Delphine. Manita, the floor is yours, please.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes,
okay.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, thanks a lot, Armando, and thank you so much to the panel and to Ramani for organizing this important event and for this important advisory product, which is going to be really useful to help create an environment of free and forthright stakeholder consultations without the fear of any retaliation reprisals. So this event and this work is going to be a major contribution to that. As you all would know, based on lessons accumulated over several decades, when the World Bank revised its policy framework for environmental and social issues, which was enshrined in the ESF, approved by the board in August of 2016, the notion of stakeholder engagement and meaningful consultations was one of the key aspects or one of the key changes that was introduced in the ESF in comparison to the safeguard policies. We did have consultations and engagement embedded in some of the policies, but not uniformly. And given all of the experiences of both the tremendous benefits that can result from meaningful stakeholder engagement and help design better projects and help implement better projects, and the need to ensure that there is no fear or hesitation or risk of reprisals or retaliation, it was felt that although it's not a substantive issue, stakeholder engagement merited a separate standard or a separate policy, so to speak. And that's why the Environmental and Social Standard 10 is on stakeholder engagement and disclosure, and it mentions not only all the good things that need to be done to promote meaningful consultation, but also notes that it is important that this is done without any fear of reprisals or retaliation. But that is an extremely, since stakeholder engagement is so important, it would really dilute the entire emphasis if there are circumstances in which there is hesitation or reluctance, or it is not carried out properly. And in fact, in those situations, it is even more important that projects, those who are involved in helping design projects, are able to listen to all the voices to avoid any uninformed project design or any any uninformed project implementation. So this is an absolutely key, and in fact, one of the main features, one of the main reasons why we needed to come up with a new policy framework was the fact that we needed to place a much stronger emphasis on free and unfettered stakeholder engagement, and clearly making sure there are no reprisals or retaliation is a core aspect of that. And that would fundamentally compromise that whole emphasis on stakeholder engagement. Given the importance of this, we do have a very clearly articulated policy on zero tolerance for any form of retaliation or reprisals, and that's something which we take extremely seriously. And as you would note from the discussions, from the examples mentioned in the publication and in others we will discuss, whenever these kinds of issues are brought to the attention of World Bank management, there is always an immediate action, which is it varies from case to case, but there is action on this, but informing that action is a very clear policy statement that this is something that we do not have any tolerance for, and that's out there, and we do everything we can to uphold that. Now, all of these cases, and I can give several examples where whenever, and some of them were, or many of them were inspection panel cases, but there are many which are not inspection panel cases. Just in the routine course of project implementation, the allegations of retaliation and reprisals are brought to our attention and in relation to a project, and then we immediately follow up on that. What we are unable to do is issues that may be brought up which are not related to a project, but are in the general context of what's going on in a country or a region. That's something which, while we have a very clear and firm policy statement on addressing any reprisals, retaliation in the context of projects supported by the World Bank, we are unable to do so when it is not related to a project. And understandably, sometimes stakeholders do expect us to get involved in situations which may not necessarily pertain to a certain project, but those are still important situations. Those are critical situations, and therefore sometimes they do approach us in such situations. But we do have a limitation. So we can do a lot when it is related to a project. We can do very little when it is not related to a project. An important clarification there. If it is a systemic kind of discrimination or retaliation or reprisal against a group, or against any aggregation of people, that is something we are able to take up in our country dialogue, even if it is not related to a project, because then we feel that a whole range of projects could be affected by such exclusion or discrimination. So that's possible, and we always do it in a way that helps address the issue, because often that requires that these discussions are held in a way that doesn't compromise anyone's identity or doesn't put them at any risk. So our approach has always been to do it in a way that is respectful of the various sensitivities involved and that focuses on addressing the problem, not on creating a situation whereby there might be the risk to the group may be further exacerbated. And in terms of how we have approached this, it depends. Each case is different, and all of the examples, even in the publication and the others that we have, they are all very different. What we do ensure is that in each of these cases, senior management is briefed and informed, and any action we take is done with the full advice and guidance of senior management. And often these are not easy issues. These are not things on which you can have straightforward procedures that if X happens, then Y will do the following. Each of these is different, and therefore a lot of thought and deliberation goes into how we respond to this, keeping the security and safety of the complainants as the center of focus, because we don't want to do anything which jeopardizes that in any case. The encouraging news is that whenever we have brought it to the attention of our counterparts, there's always been a sympathetic reaction. There's been understanding that this is something that's not acceptable, and often what we see is that it's not systemic, or it's not something that is condoned or endorsed by our counterparts, but sometimes it happens to be action taken by some local stakeholder, local official, or someone who doesn't know the entire context and can engage in behavior which tantamounts to reprisals, retaliation. So we do, working with our clients, we are able to find solutions to almost all of these cases, and again, in a way that's calibrated to the sensitivities of the situation. We also really, appreciate and admire the work that is carried out by stakeholders who bring these cases to our attention, because it's not always easy for the people who are facing such reprisals, retaliation to approach us. They are already suffering from these issues, and you can't expect them to always get in touch with the World Bank directly, or even the inspection panel. Maybe the panel, yes, because they have an ongoing relationship in the context of a complaint, but otherwise it is very difficult, and therefore the role played by CSO partners and other stakeholders in bringing these issues to our attention is extremely valuable. And in fact, they do play then an important role in also advising on how best to resolve it, to be a channel of communication, and in also kind of guiding us if, in case we are thinking of actions which they may think are not appropriate in a given context, then they provide valuable advice on that. So that role is highly appreciated. We do, in terms of how we are learning as an institution. So, all of these cases in the past were one of the main reasons why we had such a strong emphasis on stakeholder engagement, which is reflected in ESS 10. But we do realize that the work is not done. We still need to keep learning from different situations, different cases, and based on that experience, we need to continuously review our systems and procedures and get better at creating not only a level playing field, but a playing field that is free of any fear of reprisals or retaliation. So any suggestions or advice anyone today or later has for us will be extremely welcome. We also feel that in the entire development space, we need to be all speaking from the same song sheet, and therefore all development institutions need to have similar approaches and need to learn from each other. What we do want to avoid is that somehow only a few institutions become the voice against such reprisals and retaliation. And that's why this discussion and this publication is so important, because this will hopefully propel other institutions to also learn from experience and do more to make sure that we are all giving the same lesson, same message in the projects that we all work on. So let me pause here, and I will be happy to come back in the Q&A to provide more information. Thanks a lot, and back to you, Armando.
Thank you very much, Maninder. Salil, can we hear from you next?
Yes, thank you. I was just unmuting myself. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure to be part of this panel today, and thank you for inviting me. Wonderful to hear Mary's inspiring words. And Ramani, thank you for setting out what the report intends to do, and also the hearing from Chad about what the impacts actually are, and also what the bank itself thinks. It has been quite illuminating. I'm going to divide my remarks in several parts. First, to react to the report itself, and then with some forward-thinking ideas. I do want to say at the beginning that it is a milestone report. It's a significant report. The language is restrained. It's not overtly bureaucratic, but most important, it does not mince words. It uses words that you do not normally expect from international organizations in their reports. I saw the word authoritarian referred to. This is the kind of thing you read in newspaper editorials, or you listen about it in other sorts of contexts, but including human rights groups and their reports. But here it was very important to see that certain things which need to be said were being said. It also makes some very crucial points, which is what I wanted to emphasize. One is that the data reinforces the argument of the closing of the civic space, just in terms of the reprisals and complaints and where they come from. If we look at it deeply, we realize that it is a rising trend. It confirms what NGOs have been warning about. The second thing that comes through is that it is not a respecter of forms of government. It is not that only certain types of governments are in one way or another acting in ways which that you can't neatly divide that, if a government is less free, it is going to behave badly, and if it's more free, it is going to behave well. There are democratic governments which have also had challenging situations here. And to some extent, therefore, it gives independent corroboration of what human rights organizations have been saying for some time. So to that extent, I think it's commendable. I can also understand how hard it must be to publish some of what you have said, because you are a creature of the international organization system with governments and other stakeholders who would have their own views about what can and cannot be said. So I'm very pleased to see the kind of language that has come in it. But some outside the box observations, which do not necessarily challenge the report, but place it in the context. This panel exists, and in a way, I'm glad, Ramani, you mentioned John Ruggie at the outset, because, John Ruggie gave us the protect, respect, and remedy framework. And we all know that that framework exists because of state failures. I mean, if the states did their job of protecting human rights, then many of us would be doing other things with our lives rather than what we are doing. And therefore, it's important to note that this panel, in a way, exists because of state failures. I mean, it's not something that the panel needs to say openly, but us from the outside can and should observe that, because we have to hold the state to account ultimately. If the state, and therefore, if we were to try to see it from the rubric of protect, respect, and remedy, the lack of protection of the state and the ambiguity in understanding what respect and due diligence means needs a remedy in some hybrid form. And what you have is a form of a grievance mechanism. If you look at the deliberations on business and human rights at the UN Forum and so on, the least explored area tends to be the third pillar. What are the grievance mechanisms and how effective they are? And in that, this is a very ingenious and a long-standing process. It's been around for a very long time. NGOs have been frustrated about it. Now, that I do not deny that, NGOs have frustration, but I'll come to that in a moment. And because, as Maninder, you were saying, this is context specific and not one size fits all kind of a setting, it's very hard to create a jurisprudence around it. It's very hard to say that we did X in country X and therefore we will do X in country Y, because the context might be different of governance or rules of the kind of laws that are being applied and so on. So you can only work with principles. Is it working or not? Frankly, my response is I don't know. You can see the glass is half full or half empty depending on what your perspective is. So that's one thing. But I think this trust and reliance you have placed in the word of NGOs is a very good thing, because I see repeated references to reports by frontline defenders and international service and business and human rights resource centers being cited in the document. And I think that's crucial, because when NGO reports come out, the first response from government is, who are you? Who elected you? And why should we take you seriously? So reinforcement expert bodies and important bodies of the voice of NGOs has crucial importance. And at least I can't speak for all NGOs, nobody can, but I think that's a very, very positive thing to know. And of course, it also shows, it's a double-edged sword. It shows the onus on NGOs to improve their reporting and make sure that they're guided by facts and not only by ideology, however important that ideology might be. But that's a lesson to be taken away from that. And panel is doing what it is meant to do, examining, investigating, and appealing to the right authorities. Now, where there are shortcomings, and these are not shortcomings of the panel for its intent, but by the way they are designed, are in the effectiveness of it all. And it's not panel's fault, because you're meant to do certain things and inform certain entities, but you don't have coercive power. You don't have power to issue judgments. So in a way, it becomes like the national contact point system at the OECD, where it creates an illusion of a remedy, and which does not satisfy the victim, because the victim wants justice. Instead, what they get is due process. Now, due process is important, of course, because without due process, you cannot have justice. But if the outcome ultimately is not going to be just and fair, frustration with panel will increase. And therefore, managing expectations is crucial at an early stage. This criminalization of dissent is a very major problem. I mean, in the examples that you cited in the report, talk about anti-development activities and issues such as that are being talked about. But increasingly, these activists are called anti-national. Sometimes they are called as, arrested on terrorism charges, and there are, no trust being placed in the system. And that's where what Mary had said at the outset, about we will do it where appropriate and intervene where it is a grave situation. Now, that's where if a charge is something like terrorism, it leads to a judgment call. Do you really intervene or not? And a lot of thinking will have to be done, and some wider consultation will have to be done with the human rights community in that regard. Now, what can be done to strengthening and improving it? Empowering the panel to require the World Bank to act rather than merely appealing to it or recommending it is probably one way forward. The other is for the bank to make it easier for the bank to speak out when necessary without necessarily getting a consensus at the board, because once you try to put it in a board consensus, you're essentially making it like part of a UN Security Council where somebody can veto it and not let it go forward if stricter actions are needed. And most important, countries, and this goes to the heart of a couple of the cases that are cited in the study, and this is my final point. The most important point is that countries that do speak for human rights and do speak for human rights defenders and champion them should somehow be made accountable for what they say and open their doors when these people seek asylum. Because, it's very well to say that, we defend human rights defenders, but as soon as these people want safety and security, and frontline defenders or, the writers at risk and other organizations create a system for them to get out, and there are no takers, and if the process is long, then the retaliation, the reprisal, the pain, all of these things are only going to increase further. So those are some of the takeaways that I have from this. But I'm really glad this report has been done, and I hope it leads to the kind of thinking that is necessary within governments, within companies, and within the stakeholder companies, and most important from host government country, because they have to stop retaliating and they have to stop reprisals. That's where it boils down to. Thank you.
Thank you all for very insightful opening statements. Let's now move to the questions. First, I'll pose a question to all. We understand that the issue of reprisals, it's a multifaceted one. If you had to select one action that could be taken to lessen the problem, what would it be? Whoever wants to pick up, please answer this.
Let me try, and this is without knowing how the loan agreements are formed between the government and the bank. But I think if there's some covenants can be placed by the bank itself in its agreement with the state that there will be meaningful open consultation and consent sought. And if anyone complains or if anyone speaks up, there will be no retaliation. It should be part of one of the enforceable parts of the agreement, which authorizes the bank to speak up when it wishes to speak up, and at least point it out. And of course, the bank won't have coercive power, and whether it can call back the loan, all those things are beyond my competence at the moment. But I think it's something that codifies that behavior so that when the bank does speak out, it does not allow the host government to say this is an interference in our internal affairs.
Thank you.
So
Thank
maybe,
you.
thanks.
Yes, go on. Go
Can I
on,
come
please.
in next? Yes, Armando. Thanks, Salil. And I wanted to come in after Salil because I fully agree with that. And I also wanted to, my point was related to what Salil said. We do have that in our policies and in every project, Salil, because the stakeholder engagement plan I mentioned does have a clause on the fact that reprisals and retaliation, people should speak up freely without any fear of reprisal and retaliation. The point I was going to try to make is that this aspect needs to be widely publicized. It needs to come up during the consultations process, because often during project design, no one is really anticipating this as a clear and perceived risk in many environments. In some people are, and then it does come up, but it comes up kind of sporadically. In others, one is assuming things will be fine, and then during implementation, something happens. So anticipating that, the fact that it is a part of stakeholder engagement plan, it can be more prominently mentioned in the stakeholder engagement plan, which, by the way, is, while we support the clients in preparing this, it is eventually their plan. So if it is reflected in their own plan, it becomes their statement that there shall be, people can speak freely and should participate without any risk, etc. But we can do more to publicize that during consultation. So any stakeholder engagement we have, we should say, and by the way, here is, a protection for you. This is, please speak up. Here is the way you do that. If you have concerns that you have hesitation to express in a wide group, here is how you can, you can report those, or you can mention those in a discreet, confidential manner. I think that's something we can do more systematically, and I think that will help. That will help a lot. So since we are only allowed one action, I would just say that let's publicize and disseminate what is already there, which is a lot, but often not very well known. Thanks.
Brilliant. Let me continue with you, Maninder, and perhaps I'll call Ramani. Both the bank and the inspection panel have a zero tolerance policy when it comes to reprisals. What does that actually mean in practice? And can you both discuss the limitations you face in trying to uphold that policy, please?
You go first,
Want me to go first, Maninda, or do you want to go first? Okay, so thank you, Armando. So I think first and foremost, it is very important that the principle is made as a clear public statement and as a clear commitment. Now, both the bank and the panel, but I'll let Maninda speak for the bank. I mean, we obviously can't control our whole external environment. So I think that is why, and that goes back to the previous discussion, that the preventive precautionary steps are perhaps the most important aspect in terms of what we can do to limit the circumstances in which reprisals can occur. And let me be really honest, and we have been forthright in the publication as well on the limitations. Once retaliation and reprisals occur, in terms of protection, the panel, actually, we can do a lot, because we talk about our dependency on the World Bank management to take certain actions, and Maninda will probably illustrate as well that the bank itself has certain, operates within constraints on how it can exert its authority or influence or whatever the right word you want to use. But having said that, developing strong relations with the counterpart implementation agency, and we have cited examples in the report where retaliation, quite significant aspects of retaliation or or areas of retaliation occurred and where the implementation agency took firm action, putting out public notification, affirming their zero tolerance, the right for the people have a right to protest and object peacefully against a project. So I think it comes back to a variety of actions. And I think it's also context specific. What could work in one context or one country may not work in the other. That would be.
Thanks, Ramani. And
Yes, yes, go on.
yes, I think what Ramani said does apply a lot to the bank management as well. So zero tolerance means that in all of these cases are taken up. That we don't make any determination. We don't try to get into where is this person coming from, what's the motive. We don't do that. We don't know exactly what's going on. So in all of these cases, we take it up with our client counterparts, and we take it up both informally and formally. We do write to them, but then we also have a conversation because we have a relationship with them and we want to explain why this is unacceptable, why it doesn't help anyone. And if anyone on the ground might be thinking this is going to somehow help the project, they are totally mistaken. So we have both informal or interactive dialogue, and we do put it on paper so that this is something that's well known. We also, as Ramani was saying, we encourage them to disseminate this, to write to key entities. So if we are working with the Ministry of Finance, we would ask them to write to different implementing agencies and convey in no uncertain terms that the risks that no reprisals retaliation is acceptable, and there should be an environment in which stakeholders can speak up freely, and including having objections to what is going on. We also look at then, because that's only addressing one side, people don't know all of these exchanges have taken place. So we also look at how to send that message among stakeholders on the ground. So there are examples where we do have a fresh round of consultations where we explain these provisions. There have been cases where we have taken, or not we have, our clients have taken on our encouragement spots on local radios, local TV to bring up this aspect. They would talk about the project and mention, by the way, different views are welcome, and it is important that no one is in any way retaliated against in any shape or form. One challenge we do face is that sometimes there is community to community retaliation. That's harder for us to deal with, but I just wanted to flag that as an issue. Someone raises complaint, a genuine complaint against on what is happening in a project, and other community members may feel that this person is kind of undermining the overall beneficial impact of that project and somehow depriving the community of the benefit. We have had situations like that. And then again, working through local grievance redress mechanisms, local community engagement, community leaders, we have also encouraged our clients to address those kinds of community to community retaliation, which can in many ways, and sometimes it can be even worse because it's your peers, people you live with, who are actually reprimanding you and criticizing you. So, and again, as has been said repeatedly, every situation is different. And what zero tolerance translates into is that in each and every case, we take action, and we take action based on what is likely to yield results in that given situation. Thanks.
Good. Thank you very much. Ramani, let's move to you now, and perhaps Manida can come in as well. This question came to us before the event from Kenya. The writer asks, what support do you, meaning the bank and the panel, offer to those suffering reprisals when the project comes to a conclusion? Please.
Thank you, Armando. So, I mean, I want to be very upfront here. The panel's ability to do anything or influence ceases once the case is closed. So that is, and we do speak about this limitation in our report. So once a case is closed, we do not really have any influence or any ability to do anything beyond that. Having said that, there have been examples in previous panel cases where the panel has, extended and made public statements when they have perceived there to be retaliation against someone who had had prior involvement in a panel case. Now, in those circumstances, normally we would pass it, or we would inform the World Bank management. Sorry, Maninda. And the bank, bank projects have a much larger and longer life expectancy or project life than a typical panel case. So we would then, obviously inform the bank management, and then the bank management will take certain measures, some of which has already been described by Maninda. But that is, I do want to sort of wrap up and say that is one of the limitations, that our ability to act is generally within the tenure of a panel case and cannot really go beyond that.
Thanks, Ramani. And I think that communication to bank management, Ramani, is actually a great service that you can and do provide. So, you have limitations, but the fact that you convey that to us helps a lot, because, our limitation is broader in the sense, or narrower. We have more ability to act because our policy it states that related to a project. So even after a project is closed, it's still the same project. And so therefore we have more degrees of freedom. And also, just in the very legalistic sense of bank borrower relationship, that relationship is active until the loan is repaid, which is, 10, 20 years down the road. Therefore, if issues arise with respect to a closed project, we can and do take those up with our counterparts. And, we have what we do for a project when it's live. Of course, sometimes, the PIUs, the project implementing units, have been disbanded, and there's no field presence per se. So one just has to find different mechanisms and levers to act. But just in terms of taking it up with our counterparts in figuring out the best way to address that, that's something that continues even if a project is formally closed, because we still have, even in the context of that project, we have that relationship with the borrower for many years afterwards. And as Ramani said, we also have a broader relationship with them. So often this is done in the context of mutual problem solving, because it doesn't help the sector or the country or us or anyone if these issues continue to fester. So we do take it up, and we would, if there are any such situations where there are any such reprisals suffered after project closing, we would really encourage people to bring those to our attention, because we do owe it to stakeholders to do whatever we can to address that. Thanks.
Thank you. Now I'd like to make a question about the context. The report says that every reprisal incident is framed by its particular context, and therefore no one size fits all. Intervention approach, it's appropriated or is possible. Let me start with Delphine and Salil. Can you provide us examples of successful interventions that led to a lessening or an end of retaliation or can you provide perhaps elements of what constitutes a successful intervention, please?
May I?
Yes, please, Delphine, and then Salil.
Yeah, in the context of Chad, I want to stress that during the process, all stakeholders need to be listened to in order to lessen problems, because there are civil societies out there that are monitoring the project and giving signal of every single human rights violations that were occurring. That has been said. We cite the example of Irunga Gareji, who is a member of the National Assembly that was arrested and tortured, and he has his life was saved only when the former president of the World Bank called the Chadian president. That was possible only because at that time, the project is still going on, and the government of Chad did not get any money from the oil yet. And, you know, as a civil society, we warned this other stakeholders, including the World Bank, that once the government of Chad will get oil money, they will cancel everything and do whatever they want. And that was exactly what has happened. When they get the money in 2003, few time later, they removed the law, they canceled the offshore bank account for future generations, and they take everything to use for security reasons, so to do the war. So the lesson we can draw from that is that every stakeholder needs really to be listened to, and the World Bank should take into consideration the context where the project is being implemented to be able to avoid such a problem. I heard what has been said on the limitation of the inspection panel. It left the victims without remedy, because when the project is over and the problems are out there with victims that has no access to redress, it's really difficult, because the victims have suffered damages because of the project. And who should be accountable for the damages that the victims have suffered? When the recommendations from the inspection panel were not taken into consideration, who should be accountable? Or we are saying just that it's over and victims has to be like that, and other stakeholders have to walk away with what they have done. Thank you.
Good, good.
Yeah, briefly to add, I mean, I was going to mention the Chad intervention as a partly effective solution. I say partly because, you know, the requester himself was indeed tortured. I mean, the letter helped in securing some relief for him, but, you know, it came at a stage where it was fairly late in the process. And Chad Cameroon case, in fact, is a kind of you know, a lodestar for many of us, because I was at Amnesty in 2001, and Amnesty USA at that time had run a fairly effective campaign of showing consultations going on along the pipeline route, where the consultants, which were basically, you know, representing the oil companies were being accompanied by armed guards. And, so these are the kind of things that in one of our early interventions on behalf of Amnesty with the World Bank was exactly that, unless it's strictly necessary, armed guards should not be accompanying during a consultation because it creates a fear psychosis. And I think that suggestion was, for what it's worth, taken on board. But a limited but more effective example I wanted to cite was from the report itself of Pakistan, where there was a drainage project in September 2004. And I won't go into details because A, we have limitations of time, and B, it's there in the report. But essentially, there were some fishing villages which are concerned about their livelihood, and it's close to 15,000 people. And they had appealed to the panel. But before the panel could actually visit them, the leader who was supposed to meet was temporarily arrested by the local authorities. And immediately the NGO informed the panel passed the information to the management wrote a letter to the government, and it resulted in the leader being released now. So this is the way the process should work. Sadly, there are not that many great, we don't know how many such cases are. It would be good to find out how many successful interventions have been on a global plane. But I think that's the way forward of, taking a prompt action, taking the right decision. And to that extent, this is one example I can think of from the report, which shows that the intervention has been effective and successful.
Good, thank you. To Mani and Ramani, in the same vein, can you explain, is there a process for escalation within the bank? And how does it work to ensure this is not reliant on individual actions, please?
Do you want me to go first, Maninda? I think, Salil sort of illustrated a real life example on how the process works. So I think in a way, both the panel and the bank are trying to balance two principles here. One is the context specific approach. And I think everybody on, I think at least on this panel would agree that, when a certain issue comes up, the context defines both the nature of the act of reprisal, but then also the type of response that would be required. And you can't have a one size fits all. Even within a country, the context would vary depending on the region, the locality. In certain countries, you would have a very strong decentralized system of government, and then the context will be very different to where you have a highly centralized system, etc., etc. The second would be exactly the point you made, Armando, that you can have something that is 100% reliant on individuals doing the right thing, but nor can you have something that is 100% systems based. So how do we balance these two? So I think it is actually a combination and a use of judgment. So there is a system, but it is not overly prescribed and it's not overly bureaucratic. So when allegations of reprisal are reported or raised with the panel, we inform management, and depending on the nature of the reprisal, management would immediately take certain actions where they would write to the counterpart agency in the government very strongly. So management has the ability to contact government at the highest levels, reiterating its zero tolerance towards reprisals, that people have a right to object, protest peacefully, etc. Now, if there's a continuation of the reprisals and the allegations or reports of reprisals become more severe and at times egregious, then management has the ability to escalate that. So from the country manager to the sort of vice president, and in exceptional cases, even to the president, and even the board in certain circumstances might decide to take some action. So I think that is how it works, but we don't have an overly prescribed system because we actually believe that will work against the cause. And in certain areas, the highest level intervention from the bank may produce a positive outcome. And we saw that in the case of Chad, But in other cases, it might actually cause the opposite effect. So all of that has to be taken in, and that is the weighing up of the context. Thank you. Over to you, Maninder.
Yes. Thanks, Ramani. So I think you answered it, in a way for both of us. One thing I wanted to assure everyone is that it's not that action is taken at the level of a team member or a team leader when such information, allegations of retaliation, reprisals are received. So that's the one important point I would like to assure you, that it is not a delegated, decentralized system that figure out what needs to be done. To the contrary, invariably there is management attention to this. There are deliberations and discussions involving different parts of the bank, including our colleagues working on policies, on legal aspects, colleagues responsible for that particular country. So it's always flagged at a senior level, and the communication that we have, and we can use a variety of channels, but the formal communication I mentioned would go from our country director to our counterpart, because even if we are informing at the level of our direct project level counterparts, it is important that the authorities in the country know about it. Otherwise, it's not appropriate that we are flagging such important issues without keeping the authorities informed. So that's the communication that goes from the country director, and then we use, depending on the context, the case, the situation, we use a variety of ways of engaging the borrower and the client. I think in many cases, the challenge our borrowers have, we kind of share a mutual challenge. It is sometimes, we've had situations where, in spite of all clear messaging from senior authorities in the country and broadcasting on TV and having a radio talk show, some overzealous local officials still went ahead and made some statements against certain people, threatened to arrest them, etc., etc. So we have to then, in a way, then we become partners in solving that problem in a way that, and we have a variety of ways of addressing that. There are situations also where you require some closed door consultations, especially as I referred to earlier. Sometimes it's a group that is being targeted, and it may be someone on their behalf who flags this, or they flag it in a very confidential manner. And there are, I'm pleased to say that in all of those cases, very senior leadership of the bank has had, effective discussions with senior leadership of the country in a way that addresses the problem, and also keeping other partners in those situations. We also bring other partners on board so that there isn't a sense that it's the World Bank who cares for this issue. That also is not a very helpful thing. So we do try to work with other development partners in the country, and then again, in addition to all the tools we have, closed door diplomacy or consultations are also a tool that we use when necessary to help address the issue with fortunately so far with very good results. Thanks.
Thank you. Allow me to move to the YouTube. I see very interesting questions here, and one of them coming from Mr. Mark Fodder, a Coalition for Human Rights in Development. He mentions the notion of relevance of a given reprisal is treated extremely narrowly. We have struggled to get the bank to act on reprisals that clearly pose a risk to the success of the bank projects. What plans, if any, are there to look at the reprisals from that perspective? Anyone wants to pick up this question, please? Remini, any plans?
So, I mean, the nature of the panel is that we are a responsive unit, right? So we can only respond to something once a complaint or a request has been raised, to the panel. Now, in the context of a complaint or a request being raised, if the requesters also raise issues of reprisal, then, and we've already explained, we have a basis under which we would look at look at that allegation, ensure that, inform the World Bank, and then a series of actions would be taken. Now, in terms of what we could do proactively, and I think we've said this before, I mean, it comes back to, obviously, it comes back to the design of the project, ensuring that there is, strong consultation, engagement, so that and in most cases, people will have comments of any major project, and they are able to raise those concerns in a safe manner. Now, the panel also has is very clear in the guidelines we put out on reducing the risk of retaliation, that people are able to access the panel safely. Now, that is something that is very important to the panel, because it is access to accountability, access to justice. So we have very strong commitments on confidentiality, and we go to very strong lens in maintaining confidentiality of requesters. So we would not in any way disclose the identity or disclose information where it may be easy to identify circumstantially who these requesters may be. So we also do, when we go into a country, we do an assessment, a risk assessment of the country context, the operating context, including and most especially with regard to reprisals and how protection can be afforded, confidentiality can be afforded when we are in country. So these are the kind of steps we would take as an inspection panel, given our mandate and our remit. But maybe Maninda can add to this.
Maninda, please.
Yes, please. So I think as I mentioned earlier, the one important limitation we do have is that it should be in connection to a project. The retaliation, reprisal should be in connection to a project. So, so what may be seen as narrow, I hope it's not that limitation we have, that's our policy. We cannot go beyond what is in the projects, what is related to a project. Now, often there are situations where there might be individuals who are, who have some relation to the project, but then who also have other, clearly, they are, as citizens, they are doing other things, activities as well. And there may be some sense of retaliation, reprisals in their capacity other than what they are doing for a project. And then you could be posed with the question, please do something about it. And so those are some of the most challenging situations, because we can only make sure that their comments or their feedback or their statements on related to a project is something that is not retaliated against. But if there are, as citizens, if they're doing other things on which we don't have any control, not related to the project, it becomes very difficult for us to say, to our counterparts that they should, take action to make sure that those actions that their authorities may be taking should not be taken, because that would be seen as, and you would all agree, that would be seen as interfering in how a country implements its own laws and policies. So, and I think that's where this this perception sometimes that this is a very narrow interpretation, but that's the only interpretation we can go by. In some situations, it's very expansive and it's very effective. In others, it could be perceived as narrow, but we do not have the option of going beyond that, because that's the mandate which is given to us by our owners, which are sovereign states, and by our board of directors, and Armando is one of those. So I think we are not able to go beyond that mandate and start interfering with what is a country's sovereign right to properly implement their own laws and policies in a way that they think are appropriate. That's not something we can comment on or get into. I think that's what Martin might be referring to. But then again, at the project level, it's very clear, and we do unequivocally raise it, and we discuss it, and we make sure that it's not perceived as in any way related to the project, that the person's statements related to the project is what is causing these issues. But that is one of the challenges, no doubt. Thanks.
Can I make a point quickly?
Oh, yes, go on, please.
Yeah, no, I mean, I understand entirely what you're saying, Maninder, but my point is that with the trend to criminalize dissent that has been going on in so many countries, most governments would be too smart to arrest somebody for their criticism of a World Bank project, knowing precisely that then that would bring in the World Bank, but they would pick that person up for a tax violation or for some foreign currency violation or some other violation, which is not directly related to the bank, but it is clearly because of the person's activities which are affecting the development goals of the state. So what I would say, I'm not therefore suggesting that every time somebody has a traffic offense, you should get very worried about it. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. But to have a more liberal interpretation, see the context in which of the country, of the individual, and see how credible is the idea that he's actually being arrested for tax violations or some such query, and not for his other legitimate activities. I think that's very crucial. Yeah.
Yes, I fully agree with you, Salil, and would love to have a follow-up conversation with you and others. And I think one very important criteria that we use is, so you're right, but again, one very important criteria we use is that person being singled out? So, if you are picked up as Salil, the only one, and no one else in New York is being, then clearly it's an issue. If there is an entire campaign to identify tax evaders and to take action against them, then clearly we will not say, hey, please leave Salil alone because he's been talking about this project. I think that's the criteria we use, and fully agree with you. And we have had those conversations when it is an isolated action against a person, saying, by the way, he or she has done something. Then it's very easy to tell that it is in the context of a project. So, but fully agree with you, and we do make sure that it's only actions which are taken to uphold uniformly and properly local laws and policies, and not isolated kind of victimization of any given individual. Thanks.
This is a very interesting topic indeed. I see in the YouTube a comment for one attendant, Mr. Christian Donaldson. He talks about on shrinking space of civil society. And he mentions that a number of governments are passing laws that constrains the actions of civil society in different ways. I mean, I want to get back to you, Salil, and to Delphine as well. Given this evidence, what role can groups like the Frontline Defenders, or organizations like UN Office of High Commissioner of Human Rights, or other stakeholders can play in addressing this retaliation?
Thank you. That's a great question indeed. Thank you so much for raising it. And because the shrinking of civil society is a very real thing, and it has been going on for a while. We've seen laws being passed in country after country which are restricting the space, whether it's Philippines and Singapore and India and Russia and so many countries where it is becoming harder and harder for civil society organizations which work in the field of rights, whether it is for protection of rights or for for increasing the capacity of individuals to defend their own rights, for them to find it harder and harder to receive funding from abroad. It almost become impossible. And domestic sources do exist, but sometimes the domestic sources often do not want to take positions that are overtly political, and that shrinks it even further. So in terms of there's a resource clampdown. Now you mentioned frontline defenders as one entity here, and which is I see is a canary in a coal mine. It's a coal mine, and frontline defenders like the NGO on the ground is the one which tells you what's wrong and that tries to get the individual to a safer space. OHCHR, again, the Office of High Commission of Human Rights, Mary Lawlor, who was with us, I think she had to leave at the hour, so she's probably not there. She can issue a statement, but even there are constraints that she has. Her constraint is that she can only go to a state unless she's officially invited. Otherwise, she's reliant on external reports. That's the UN system works. But the entity you have not mentioned here are sovereign states here. And I think that's where the solution lies. That if there are reprisals or if there is a shrinking of space, that is an issue that has to be taken up by sovereign states, which have to name and shame and embarrass or convince through diplomatic means, through other means, that this is not the way forward. You can't be a democracy and have rules which constrain those who are trying to hold the powerful to account by preventing them from operating in an effective manner.
Good.
Yeah.
Moving ahead.
Yes, I just want to.
Does anyone would like to speak?
I think
Yes,
Delphine wanted to say something.
Delphine.
Yeah.
Yes. I
Yeah,
missed you.
thank
Yes,
you.
go on, please.
I just want to add to what Salilav said, that the organization like Frontline Defenders should like improve their mechanism of the protection of human rights defenders at risk, as to make it more accessible and more fit to the emergency situation, because we have used these mechanisms before, and it will take like 5-7 days to fill out all the forms, to go and come, and by that time the worst could happen to a human rights defender who is at risk. It's important to have social mechanisms out there, but it's also important to make it flexible, accessible, and right to the fact. So that's all I wanted to add. Thank you.
Very good. Very good. Another question coming from YouTube from Mr. Brent Milliken. Are there plans to translate the report into other languages and organize a discussion about the fundings in the bank's member countries? Remedy, would you like to answer this, please?
Thank you so much. We have not yet had a discussion on translation, but certainly if there is, a strong interest to have the report translated, that is something that we would definitely consider. Certainly, panel investigation reports and eligibility reports are always translated in the language of the country where the request was raised, or the language that is most commonly used by the requester. So this is something we would consider. Secondly, do we plan to have discussions about the findings in the bank member countries? As you know, there are something like 180 member countries in the World Bank, so almost every country in the world is a World Bank member country. We certainly plan to participate in other forums, and we have also been invited by various other events to present the work we have done in this report. So we will be doing that, and we will do more and more of that. So wherever we have the opportunity, we will definitely be presenting the report and participating in various forums where we would have a speaking slot and we could share the findings of the report. So thank you.
Good. Manita, let me get back to you on a hot topic. There is a question here for Mr. Kendall Salcito. If the bank doesn't see a relationship between closing civic space and the restrictive legislation, is that rational? Salih is describing the very real weaponizing of law against HRDs. Would you like to make some comments on this, please?
Thanks for the question. I think what is important to note and remember is that, and that's why the new ESF and the ESS 10 on stakeholder engagement and disclosure is so important. And whenever we have a monthly meeting with our CSO colleagues, and one point I often make is that it is important for our civil society partners to help our clients and us make the best use of this ESS 10 on stakeholder engagement and disclosure, because this policy applies regardless of what's going on in a country. We do not, it's not that this policy, the core principles and provisions of ESS 10 are not subject to the context or the situation or the priorities in a given context. Those are universal in the sense those have to be complied with, those have to be implemented in each every project. And that can be a very powerful kind of wedge for positive change, because we going in with the World Bank supported project, we need to see open and free stakeholder engagement, people's ability to challenge proposed designs or plans. And that's something and we can't do it on our own. We do need civil society partners to help us do that. So even in some of the toughest contexts, we require, we support, and we work on implementing the provisions of ESS 10, which often become the wedge and or the entry point for opening up that space even wider. So, and that's all we can do. We cannot, again, we are not able to comment on what's happening beyond beyond the space of World Bank projects in a given society or country. That's not our role. It's not appropriate thing for us to do. But we do have we have the Global Partnership on Social Accountability, which supports civil society partners to be an even more effective part of the development process. We have tremendous civil society engagement across the world. We have some of the mechanisms we are discussing today, and we have ESS 10, which is while we always need to be sensitive to a context, but at least those principles are context blind for good reasons. It's not that if the civics case is open, then please implement ESS 10. If it isn't, then you have an option of not implementing it. But it is important that we work together and collectively to make sure that it is implemented in its true spirit. And that's why it is important that, for example, the draft stakeholder engagement plans are disclosed in every project for comment before they are finalized. That's a requirement. It is important that civil society looks at them and comments and provides feedback to improve them. So if some stakeholders are being omitted or they have been missed, or the forms of engagement don't appear to be adequate or appropriate, it is important that we receive that feedback from civil society partners so that we can collectively strengthen that. So I just wanted to flag the tremendous importance of ESS 10 as a key factor in making sure that in the context of World Bank projects, that civic space not only is maintained, but it thrives and it becomes better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Romani, let me get to you. The report talks about the evolution in how the inspection panel responds to allegations of reprisals in its complaints. Can you give us a picture on how has this been trending, please?
Thank you very much. So we actually have a schematic in the report that shows from the inception of the panel how we've been taking, as we said, incremental steps to looking at the issue of reprisals in a much more systematic way. So the confidentiality requirement was something that the panel honored and committed to right from inception in 1993. And as we said, the panel was also, in terms of transparency, we were the first amongst the international accountability mechanisms, and very early in the panel's, very early in the panel's life. So from 1994, the second year of the panel's life, we reported in our cases where there were allegations or reports of reprisals. But as many of the speakers here have acknowledged, there has been the trajectory is going upwards at the moment. There are more and more restrictions now on retaliatory measures taken on human rights defenders. So that's when in 2016 we put out our guidelines with our public statement on zero tolerance, and also our guidelines on reducing the risk for reprisals and retaliations. Following that, we also have put in place a system for tracking both the reports of reprisals, but also the actions taken to address it and what has happened in terms of counteraction. So we actually have a tracking sheet where we track we document every report and allegation of reprisal, and then the actions that have been taken by the panel and in turn by the bank, and then what the outcomes have been. So these are this is what we mean by the systematic approach taken by the panel and the incremental steps that we have taken to address this issue. And this report is now yet another step in that process. But as everybody will say here, there is no finished point here. This is work in progress. The situation is dynamic, it changes all the time, and therefore how we respond has to also adapt and adjust and evolve to the situations.
Thank you. We are getting close to the end. Perhaps a last question. I mean, we are in the era of digital transformation. I was wondering how are social media and the technology more generally affecting the types of reprisals experienced and how they are affecting a bank and a panel and responding to reprisal concerns. Maninder, would you like to come up on this, please?
Maybe I'll be happy to come in, Armando. Maybe I should come in after because after some of the other panelists, because I think it has more implications on how people have the ability to flag these issues. I think I was thinking about
Ramani, you'd
yeah,
like to start?
do that.
Or maybe, Armando, I will come in too after Balinda, but maybe I'll let Salil and Delphine maybe can reflect that from their perspective, and then we can come in from the panel and back.
All right, good. Salil, please.
No, sure, yeah, and I know we have at least 5 minutes. I'll be quick on this, but it's the boilerplate response, frankly, that of course technology is both good and bad, and social media can be good and bad. Social media is terrific when it sends out the right information to everyone. If it makes it easier to, reduces the barriers to entry for people to report and request, that's terrific. But it also exposes them because of the surveillance technology, right? You may have excellent ways of protecting the identity of people. They might try to use virtual private networks. They might try to camouflage their identity. But as we know from the NSO case of Israel, it's very possible and easy for governments and others to penetrate through those layers of security and identify who you are. So that whole idea of surveillance and what it does and whether that chills conversation is something worth bearing in mind. And you know, it's not just surveillance of messages coming to you, but even the movements of the people. If phone tracking technologies are in place and someone comes to meet the World Bank, and then, you know, the phone is in his or her pocket, and they go and meet 5 other activists whose names are not made known to anybody, but somebody will be able to find out. So it has to be very handled, and it should not be seen as a panacea for all problems. So yes, social media can be very powerful, and it can be very easy for ease of access to report what people want to say. But it should not be seen as a solution for everything, because that itself might be intimidating. Also, I don't even want to get into the fact that how human rights defenders, particularly women human rights defenders, LGBT human rights defenders, are vilified and abused online, and some may not even appear online to start with. So the traditional non-technical technological modes should not be given up.
Any quick comments, Ramani, Maniter?
Yes, maybe very quickly, Salil. So I echo your comment about the non-traditional method should not be given up. And, you know, social media is both an asset and advantage. Obviously, it has compressed access, you know, it brings together geographies, but then it comes with its own disadvantages and limitations. So we have had cases too. And I think one of the biggest challenges are when people make allegations of being smeared on social media and have social media campaigns run against them. It's very difficult to identify the perpetrators of that. So when you look in terms of how the panel and through the panel, the bank can respond to that, because the bank's ability to also sort of influence is, you know, with the authorities and its counterpart agencies, and often that, you know, that it is very difficult because you could be quite clear that nobody has been directly involved, but, you know, people work through proxies, through anonymous sources, and that is very hard to identify. So that is one of the big challenges on social media. And I think Salil has already spoken about the surveillance aspect. So as surveillance becomes more sophisticated, then that also, the ability for human rights defenders to protect themselves becomes more exposed and vulnerable.
Thank you, Manita. 30 seconds to you, please.
Yeah, so very limited, I think the very limited things to add. I think for us, it's more in some context, or in many countries, we do broad social media monitoring, which is very helpful to flag various issues, but it hasn't had any implication for us on the issue of reprisals and retaliation. So either issues getting flagged through that channel, I'm not aware of any example where that's how issues came to us, or whether it was helpful for us to respond to or address it. It's more the broader scanning of social media in a country or in a project area to just see what's going on and to detect any concern about any issues. But those are more substantive issues, not issues of retaliation or reprisals. But happy to think about it more and continue the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have come to end of our time. It was a great opportunity to discuss this report. I mean, as it was mentioned, I mean, a document with a candid language built from strong evidence based on the data. I mean, and we hope to continually push into this direction of accountability. So I want to thank our speakers, Mary Lawlor, Ramani, Delphine, Maninder, Salil, for your participation. And I want to thank you all of you for watching and listening and for your questions. There were several suggestions. We hope that the report will be made available in other languages particularly the Latin languages, as Mr. Luis Fernando suggested. So once again, thank you very much, and have a great rest of you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Mr. Manuel, for your excellent moderation. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.